Okay, welcome to AQA A-Level Philosophy Question Predictions for 2025. So this video slash podcast is going out months early to patrons of patreon.com/RPE with Dr. T, all one word. If you've paid for this through the Patreon, just a disclaimer or request at the start, please don't share it beyond yourself. Because that would sort of wreck the exclusivity and the point of it being behind a paywall on Patreon. It will go public on my YouTube channel closer to the date of the exam, much closer to the exam. So why am I doing this? Well, the reason it's going out to patrons first is, of course, to help drive traffic to my Patreon and incentivize people to patronize me on there. You can, of course, just delete your or cancel your membership after you've got this video. More videos will appear. At least one a month, I think, for a reasonable price given what I charge for tutoring. But you can just take this, of course, and just to remind you, you can just cancel your subscription so you don't have to keep paying, but you won't get any more early access or exclusive videos. Again, why? Well, because so teaching and tutoring philosophy and religious studies and theology is part of my livelihood. So this is me unashamedly trying to turn this venture of question prediction into making some more money, as well as just it being an advert for my tutoring. I've got to the point now where I can't, this is the bottom line really, I can't accommodate all the requests for tutoring I'm receiving. I just don't have time to fit it in. So I've created this Patreon site to try and funnel people, at least give people something from me that they can pay for if they want to extra. So that's why this video is going to the patrons first. Now what you're really interested is the question predictions, but thank you for bearing with me and for not sharing this beyond yourself if you got it from Patreon. So let's get on with the question predictions, please. All right, here we go. Straight in with epistemology, first part of philosophy, paper 1. Let me just turn on my electronic pointer. There it is. So yeah, sure. Let's start with the 3 markers. 3-mark questions. They can be on pretty much anything, can't they? So they're very hard to guess, but they're not so difficult. So we're not too worried about 3 markers. But if you just look quickly along the row, the specimen paper was on skepticism. The 3-marker, we've had types of knowledge, clear and distinct ideas, the difference between a priori and a posteriori, necessary and contingent, direct and indirect realism. And I guessed definition of a definition last year, and that's basically what came up. So that was quite nice. Only a 3-marker, but quite nice to get it right, because you'll remember that this is stuff right at the start of the course to do with Zagzebski's definition of definitions and so on, necessary and sufficient conditions. That's what came up. So that was nice. But basically your 3 markers in a philosophy A-level exam are going to be about things like definitions or simple distinctions. Yeah, simple polarities or distinctions between 2 different kinds of a thing in philosophy. So what's left? I don't know, not a lot's left really. So here are my just sort of out of the air guesses. I wonder if they could ask a definition for a definition of a type of a theory of knowledge, because the essay last year, the 25-marker last year, was on theories of knowledge, justified true belief. So that will definitely, almost definitely, 99% certainty not be the 25-marker this year, because they never repeat them. So that means it's much more likely, if it appears at all, theory of knowledge and so on, to be in the definition question. So maybe they'll give you a definition question for a 3-marker about a particular theory of knowledge. So why not infallibilism? Because I don't think that's come up so much before. They could just ask you, define infallibilism, what is it? Something like that for 3 marks. So what's the definition? K, or knowledge, equals IJTB, justified true belief, but when you have infallible justification that you can't doubt. Or maybe they'll ask about types of skepticism. That would be a nice one that they haven't really asked about yet. Sensible one to come up. Similar to the specimen, but particularly on types. So, what's the difference between local and global skepticism? That would make a sensible 3-marker in my mind. Or maybe doubt. They could do one of the waves of doubt or something. Give or state one of the waves of doubt, or what are the 3 waves of doubt. Ideas. It's very hard to guess a 3-marker though, so those are just a few ideas for you. Let's move on to the 5 markers then. So last year some people were irritated by my predictions, which were freely available on YouTube, because I took a bit of a shortcut and said anything not already, because it's getting harder and harder to guess these. Though I said those see tutorials, so see the other videos on my on my YouTube, or the other teaching I was doing, and what have you. So this year, because some of you will have paid for this, I'll be a bit more specific, but just still the disclaimer. Yeah, the title, of course, of the video is predictions. A more accurate term might perhaps be guesses. I'm often right, as you can see, and you'll see in some of the other slides. I'm often right with these guesses, but they're still only guesses. So I'm afraid no money back if my guesses aren't right. This is to steer you in your revision. You should be revising everything, or almost everything. I'll give you some tips on the things that you actually don't need to revise. Well, I'll do it right now. Basically, the things you don't need to revise are how to do essays for the essay question the last year. The one 2 years ago can still come up, so you still have to revise that, I'm afraid, but they have never repeated an essay question for a 25 marker, so you don't need to expend extra energy. You'll still need to know lots of criticisms and evaluation points for short answer questions, but you don't need to expend extra energy planning for an essay that came up last year and learning that plan. So there you go. Right, back to the 5 markers. So last year it was direct realism and perceptual variation. And even though I said anything not already last year in the predictions, that is actually one that I planned with my classes and tutees, and you'll have found information on it in my YouTube video. So that was quite, we kind of were ready for that. So that was nice that came up. But yeah, loads of stuff has come up so far. Here are my best guesses, okay, for 5 markers. And actually, there is a little bit more on the next slide about these. But for now, let's say, why not Berkeley on primary or secondary qualities? Yeah, that hasn't come up yet, as far as I can see in the 5 markers. Why not direct realism and another criticism? So what about the time lag criticism of direct realism? Now, that has never been asked about for a 5 marker. That would be a very sensible question for a 5 marker, because we've had illusion and perceptual variation now. So why not this one? Or what about a criticism of idealism? Because we haven't had any of those. We've had things to do with primary and secondary qualities. Hang on a sec. Why am I predicting it again there? There'll be a reason in the next slide. I think that might come up again. We'll see in a moment. Yeah, but there's no criticisms of idealism, so that would be a very sensible thing to appear as a 5 marker if they're trying to ask about things they haven't asked before, because they're running out of stuff to ask about, and they have started repeating questions on this exam, by the way. Okay, and then now let's move on to 12 markers, so higher stakes now. Actually a bit easier to guess the higher stakes questions, but harder to do, of course, so you still need to actually put in the work and revision to be able to do them. So let's see, what have we got? Last year we had the cogito plus an empiricist response. That was very nice, because that's one I practiced with my tutees. There's stuff in my YouTube videos about that, so it won't be that again. What haven't we had though? We haven't had the intuition and deduction thesis in any sort of extended way in a 12 marker. So why not that? Why not Cartesian deductions from the cogito? Although maybe that's still not hugely likely, given they did something to do with the cogito last year. So why not responses to skepticism? 2 years ago we had the philosophical skepticism essay. So why not do a 12 marker this year on how, say, Russell or someone would respond to skepticism about the external world? We've sort of had that with indirect realism and Locke. We've had it in 2020 with skepticism and reliabilism in particular. So what about a different response to skepticism? It's a guess. It's still a guess. More in a moment on the next slide on that. But yeah, now let's get to the big one. So the most important one to try and be prepared for, the 25 mark essay. Last year JTB, so we guessed that. So that was very nice. So why not innatism? Because that was the other candidate for last year. It's been a long time since innatism. They've now asked all the essay questions that they really could ask if they're being fair and sticking to what they say they will do and tend to do in these exams. There isn't really a major area of the specification for epistemology left to ask about. So I think it's going to be a repeat. So we've had a JTB repeat from the specimen. Maybe they'll now start going through the others and repeating them in order from oldest first. So maybe innatism. Or maybe it will just be a perception one. But if it's a perception one, it's going to be phrased probably in terms of one of the major theories of perception. So maybe a direct realism question, maybe idealism. Although my money is on, because it was philosophical skepticism last year. Oh yeah, okay, look, so here's to be fair, here's the one way they've never phrased it in a 25 marker. They've never phrased an epistemology 25 marker about theories of perception in terms of indirect realism. So yeah, I shouldn't overlook that. We shouldn't overlook that. It could be discuss indirect realism, something like that, or is indirect realism the correct theory of perception, or evaluate indirect realism. An essay question phrased in terms of indirect realism, I think that is also highly likely to come up. You would be very sensible to be prepared for that. Bit more on epistemology then. Right, here are the areas of the specification that I can identify that haven't yet come up in the short answer questions. So I've given you my best tips now for the 25 markers. Let's just say a little bit more about the short answer questions. Yeah, so they've never asked about infallibilism, interestingly, in a short answer question, like a less than 25 mark answer question, which is why I'm predicting infallibilism. Like I said before, they've never asked direct realism and time lag. They've done the other criticisms of direct realism now, so that would be highly likely to come up. They've never asked about indirect realism leading to skepticism about the external world, though. Just straightforwardly about that specification bullet point. So that could come up, although if the essay is on indirect realism, then that's not likely to come up. This is what I meant earlier. I apologize. A bit more clarity on what I said earlier. Yeah. They've asked about what the primary secondary quality distinction is. Yeah, and that's in indirect realism, isn't it? Sorry, little mind fart there. So I'm updating this now with more specificity, which is why it's always good to watch the video or listen to the podcast all the way through to the end. Yeah, Berkeley's attack on primary secondary qualities, that distinction from Locke, that could very well come up. But they also haven't asked about idealism with reference to criticisms that have to do with illusion or hallucination or solipsism. So no criticisms of idealism have come up in AO1 questions yet. Maybe that's because they think they're too hard and they're trying to make it easier in the first half of paper 1 in this exam, or they just haven't got around to them yet. So I would be prepared for those. That's good revision for for a theory of perception essay as well. Which you could choose to talk about idealism in, although I suppose that would be unlikely. Few people defend idealism these days, really, do they? We haven't had an AO1 shorter question on Plato and Leibniz's arguments for innate ideas. We haven't had one on Descartes' deductions as part of the intuition and deduction thesis. These are all the things I mentioned before, but I'm just showing you why I've predicted them. Yeah, because these are the things they haven't asked about yet in any of the now many exams there's been. So they've been repeating 25, or they're running out of 25 mark essay questions, but they're not running out of short questions. So yeah, why not local global skepticism or first and second waves of doubt? They've asked about the third one before, or Descartes and empiricist responses to skepticism. So loads they have left to ask about if they choose to ask about things they haven't yet asked about. But of course, you do have the thing that they do actually now. We've seen repeats in particular in ethics. This has happened, repeats of previous short answer questions, even though they still have stuff left to ask about, which is a bit irritating. I don't know why they're doing that. Maybe they just think they don't want to ask too difficult questions, so they're keeping it to the easier ones, or maybe they haven't realized there's stuff they still haven't asked about. That's unlikely. That's unlikely. We should probably give them more credit than that. But what that means, of course, is you still need to revise everything, I'm afraid. There are no real shortcuts. This is just extra help to try and point you in the right direction, tell you where to focus your revision especially. And if you've got extra time for revision, I would focus on these things. But you still really need to do everything except, I would say, an essay plan for JTP when it comes to epistemology. Okay, hopefully that gives you lots to be going on to do with epistemology. Let's keep going. On to ethics, so moral philosophy, second part of paper 2, be on the same day as the epistemology. Right, how should we do this? Shall I just talk about 25 markers on this slide? Shall I narrate my thought processes as I have them? Let's make this a nice beefy video so you're getting bang for your buck. Let's talk about all the types of question here, and then we'll do the same thing of covering things that haven't been asked about again in the next section. So 3 markers, what have they been on? Aristotle and pleasure, anti-realism, verification principle, cognitivism, non-cognitivism in ethics, hypothetical imperatives, naturalism and non-naturalism, and then we guessed different forms of hedonism, or what hedonistic versus non-hedonistic utilitarianism last year, or definition of eudaimonia. It's very hard to guess 3-mark questions though, so those turned out to be, look, they were kind of stabs in the dark. So here you go, here's an example. So they repeated last year a 3-marker. Astonishing, so much they could still ask about, but they chose to ask what is Ayer's verification principle again, just like they'd done in 2020. So I think that was actually quite a nice, easy one. It's a bit fiddly, the verification principle, but see my revision videos for precision about how to do that. So yeah, it's still anyone's guess, this 3-marker. I still think these are nice questions. They still haven't asked these. If you're listening somewhere, somewhen, AQA examiners, can you please ask them, the students, about hedonistic and non-hedonistic utilitarianism or eudaimonia? Actually, that's probably just going to make it hugely unlikely this would ever come up now. But hey, at least this is behind a paywall. There probably aren't any AQA examiners paying for this video. So why not these? Or just who knows? Maybe they'll repeat one again. Who knows? The essay was on utilitarianism last year, though, which was a bit of a shocker. So maybe it'll be a short answer question on utilitarianism. 5 markers, right? What has it been so far? All sorts of things. Still very hard to guess, as I say. So yeah, I'm being a bit cheeky again and saying any criticism not covered already, but I'm going to give you more detail on that in a moment. Okay, so stay tuned. Don't turn off the video or the podcast, because there's more to say about that. I'll tell you what criticisms have not been covered already shortly on my next slide. But of those, I'm picking out, if I was setting the exam, yeah, I'm similar to last year. I predicted ones that didn't come up. So I still think there's a high chance of these coming up. They have never asked a 5-marker on Kant's second formulation of the categorical imperative, which is on the specification, so why not? That might appear. Also, Aristotle and responsibility. They could ask about, voluntary, non-voluntary, or involuntary actions in Aristotle. Although if they did all of that, that I think would be a really good 12-marker. So I'd say that for a 5-marker or a 12-marker. Why not? Hasn't happened yet. If they don't want to repeat stuff, that would be sensible. 12 markers, okay. They love doing applied ethics questions for 12 markers. We've had Kant and lying, Aristotle and simulated killing, Kant and stealing, but we've never had an eating meat one. So that would make a huge amount of sense. Give us an eating meat 12 marker, or maybe they think it's too predictable. So they've thwarted me in persisting in not arguing that when I predicted that last year. In fact, they used an applied area that they've asked about before last year, simulated killing. They just changed the normative theory they wanted you to talk about. So trying to keep you on your toes there. They did Kant and simulated killing last year. So why not a different normative theory and eating meat, or keep the normative theory the same, maybe, because they've done Kant twice now in a row. No, that's highly unlikely. It probably won't be Kant in the 12 marker again. So why not Aristotle and eating meat, or utilitarianism and eating meat? That's a very sensible one, because there's loads to say about utilitarianism and eating meat and speciesism and so on. So I think that's quite likely. Or maybe they'll just do a curveball and stay away from the applied ethics. So why not golden mean would be quite sensible, or phronesis. There's loads of virtue ethics stuff that they haven't asked about yet, because there's so much virtue ethics stuff. So why not that for a 12 marker? And as I say, that could also be Aristotle and responsibility could also be spun out to 12 marks quite easily with all that he has to say about all those sorts of action and so on. So still quite hard to guess, but you got some pointers there. I wouldn't be surprised by an eating meat question, but maybe they'll curveball it and do something else, in which case the most likelihood I'd say is Aristotle. But who knows? Who knows? Because Aristotle could be, no, sorry, let's see. Well, yeah, it's not impossible that Aristotle would be the 25 marker looking at this. So what have we had? Utilitarianism and utilitarianism in the past, and then they did utilitarianism again for 2024 after it was specimen and 2019. So come on, it's not going to be utilitarianism again. Anything but utilitarianism. This is one of the few years that you don't need a utilitarianism essay plan up your sleeve, though you still need to know criticisms of utilitarianism for the short answer questions. Yeah, virtue ethics was a while ago, so to be fair, I haven't put virtue ethics in this box, but this is why you have to listen to the commentary, I'm afraid. Virtue ethics could still come up, even though, oh no, there you go, sorry, it has been repeated in 2023, so we've had virtue ethics twice. Yeah, it's still not impossible. It could come up. It could come up in 2025. I wouldn't put it past them, because it wasn't last year, so it's 2 years ago, and then 3 years before that. They're within their rights to repeat it, but maybe, fair enough, it's lower down the scale, so that's why I didn't put this in this box. Sorry, I made these tables a while ago, and I'm making the video after the fact because I start doing this much earlier with my, well, for my actual in-person students before I put it out on YouTube and Patreon, etc. So we've also had a Kantian ethics and anti-realism question in 2021 and 2022 respectively. Right, so this means that if it's probabilities, they're most likely looking at this to repeat Kant, a Kantian ethics 25 mark essay question based on what's come up before. So, you know, Can Kantian ethics be defended? That was the phrasing, something like that last year. Or is Kantian ethics convincing? Is it the correct ethical theory? Something like that. Very sensible for a 25-mark question. But the next most likely candidate is a meta ethics question. And I know lots of students don't like meta ethics, but there's no reason for that. It's the most fun area of moral philosophy. Go and watch. I've now got a special meta ethics video dedicated to just to meta ethics. There's tons about meta ethics out there on YouTube, but it's a bit of a sea of content. So go and find mine. I've got you one just on meta ethics. It's the most fun area, so it might be on that. If it was, similarly to how they've never phrased the theory of perception question in epistemology in terms of indirect realism, they've never phrased the meta ethics question when they've once asked it in moral philosophy in terms of moral realism, because it was on anti-realism in the year there was advanced information because of the pandemic, and everyone was really angry about this because they didn't make it clear that they could ask about it for a 25-mark essay question. So there was a bit of justified righteous indignation there. But they can now ask about anything. So if it was meta ethics, maybe they'll phrase it in terms of moral realism. Or maybe they'll even phrase it in terms of cognitivism or non-cognitivism. That's very possible. Be prepared for that. Have your meta ethics essay plan up your sleeve and be prepared to tailor it into the exact terms that the question is asked in. Not just do a general essay, but answer the exact questions set. Golden rule in all exams, including this one. Final footnote on 25 markers in moral philosophy. So yeah, I've in the past I've predicted an applied ethics question because sample questions do exist out there for this. There are examples of sample questions that someone has come up with and presented out there. I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, I always forget which textbooks it's in, but one of the textbooks, I know they're not exam board approved, but one of the quite good Hodder textbooks, I think, has an applied essay 25 marker in, but they have never asked an applied essay, an applied ethics 25 marker, which would be phrased in terms of something like, is it right to eat meat, or is it right to steal, or is it wrong to simulate killing, or is it wrong to lie, something like that. Okay, maybe that's because it's too hard. It's more like a university style question. You could take it in all sorts of directions. You could go meta-ethical on it, or you could look at one of the normative theories, or meta-ethics and a normative theory, or more than one normative theory, or all the normative theories, or just everything. So it's kind of huge. So maybe that's why they don't want to throw it at lovely little poor little year 13s. I think you could cope, and it would be interesting. But so it could come up. It's possible. They're within their rights, but they have never asked so far, so it's unlikely. So I'm sort of maybe scaring you a little bit, but just reminding you that it's not impossible. They're allowed to ask an applied ethics question, but maybe hopefully reassuring you as well. Don't freak out. Don't go overboard. Don't spend ages. Whoops, excuse me, hit my microphone. Don't spend ages prepping it and doing extra work on it, because really the thing is, it's still quite low likelihood because they've never done it so far. So hopefully that's helpful to you. Let's keep going. Next slide. Yeah, so to moral philosophy specification content that they haven't asked about yet in short questions. This is what's informing my non-essay question predictions. Although I have another slide for you of this. There's two slides on this because there's just so much to say. There's tons, unlike epistemology and metaphysics of God, actually, interestingly, there's tons of stuff they still never asked about. So they've never just asked, what is Bentham's utility calculus, even though everyone's learned all the different parts of the hedonic calculus, not calculator, students, calculus. They've never asked, so that's kind of annoying if you've memorized all of those. They've never asked about Mill's higher and lower pleasure distinction, or as proof of the greatest happiness principle, a nice meta-ethics spec point there, or non-hedonistic utilitarianism. They've never asked about that, just what that is, or preference utilitarianism, definition of that. They've never asked about distinction between act and rule utilitarianism. That would be a quite nice 3-marker actually as well. Wouldn't be surprised if that came up as a 3-marker. As I say, they've never asked about second formulation of the categorical imperative. They've never asked about eating animals, though they've asked about other applied areas. They've not yet asked about this one in relation to the normative theories, what they would say. And yes, to be fair, they've asked about the other applied areas, but they haven't done every applied area for every normative theory. So as I said earlier, that's useful to remember. They could still ask about an applied area they've asked about before, but with a new normative theory they haven't asked about before. Look at all this Aristotle stuff they haven't asked about yet. So this is why I'm saying I wouldn't be surprised if we get some Aristotle questions on this paper. We haven't had the good for human beings, the meaning of eudaimonia as the final end. We haven't had the relationship between virtues and function. We've had the function argument now, so that won't come up again because that was last year. So it won't come up this year. I'm sorry. We haven't had all this stuff, which is quite tricky. Aristotle's account of virtues and vices. Virtues as character traits or dispositions. That's not too tricky. Education and habituation in the development of moral character. The importance of feelings. The doctrine of the mean and its application to particular virtues. That's a shocker. They haven't asked about that at all yet in any philosophy exam they've set. So wouldn't be surprised. Sorry, any A2 philosophy exam they haven't set. Wouldn't be surprised if that came up. Moral responsibility in Aristotle hasn't come up yet. Be ready for that. Basically, pretty much all of virtue ethics. They don't seem to like asking about it very much, even though we had function argument last year in these exams. So yeah, also the relationship between virtues, actions, and reasons, very fiddly, that one, and the role of practical reasoning, phronesis. So that's why that was one of my guesses. But those are just guesses. Any of this is possible. In meta-ethics, we haven't had the origins of moral principles, reason, emotion, attitudes, or society. We haven't had moral realism, specifically what it is, the definition of it. And we haven't had definitions of or explanations of what is naturalism, what is non-naturalism. So yeah, including how utilitarianism is naturalist and virtue ethics is naturalist, and intuitionism and the naturalistic fallacy. Deep breath. See, there's tons. So it's you just, I'm afraid you just need to revise everything. These are the best pointers I can give you. Although a bit more. Here we go. Yeah. So continuing. So actually, and going back slightly on the specification, I don't know why I did it this way around. I was just jumping around. Criticisms of utilitarianism, they haven't asked about yet. They haven't asked about utilitarianism and fairness/rights. They haven't asked about utilitarianism and problems with calculation. Kant, all sorts of Kant criticisms that they haven't asked about. If it's the essay, they won't ask about these. If it's not the essay, they could ask about these. Kant and clashing competing duties. Kant and not all universalizable maxims are distinctly moral, and not all non-universalizable maxims are immoral. They haven't asked about Kant and when Kantian decisions or recommendations clash with intuitions about consequences, like the axe murder and so on. And they haven't asked about Kant and Foot's criticism about really ethics as a system of hypothetical imperatives, which is a nice one to ask about. Still more, criticisms of virtue ethics. They haven't asked about whether Aristotelian virtue ethics can give sufficiently clear guidance about how to act. That's a humdinger. That would be good to come up. Clashing competing virtues, whether a trait must contribute to eudaimonia in order to be a virtue, the relationship between the good for the individual and moral good. I cover all of these in my moral philosophy revision video. In fact, just a quick note on that, there's one up at the moment in 2025. You have to, it's a larger revision video that includes the ethics. I will at some point finally get around to putting up an individual revision video just about ethics. Maybe that will go to patrons first. And then in meta-ethics, we haven't had Hume's fork, Hume's is-ought gap, John Mackey's arguments from queerness. We've had the other one from relativity, though. We haven't had whether anti-realism can account for how we use moral language, or the problem of accounting for moral progress, or whether anti-realism becomes moral nihilism. So yeah, just underline the point, there's absolutely tons still to ask you about. It's much harder than in epistemology to guess these questions based on things that haven't come up before. But I hope that's still useful for you and just jogged your memory as well about the different parts of the specification. Let's keep going so this doesn't turn into too much of an enormous monster video. Yeah, and actually, in fact, the next video, I'm going to put the predictions, guesses for the rest of the exam, so paper 2, metaphysics of God and metaphysics of mind, in another video. So that video will appear closer to the date of paper 2, the free version. If you want to get the early version, early access version, you can go and grab it by signing up at patreon.com/RPE with Dr. T. Cheers.